in the dense forest, where the trees whispered secrets of ancient times and the wind carried the scent of adventure. Andre found himself on a walk one fateful day. It was an ordinary morning at first, with the sun filtering through the leaves, casting shadows that danced like ghosts across the forest floor. But little did Andre know, this seemingly routine stroll would turn into an encounter he would never forget. As Andre wandered deeper into the heart of the woods, he felt a strange sense of unease settle in his chest. The usual sounds of chirping birds and rustling leaves were eerily absent, replaced by an unsettling silence. He had been here before, many times, but today felt different. The air was thick, almost charged with anticipation. It wasn't long before Andre saw them, 3 wolves, emerging from the underbrush, their eyes gleaming with a primal hunger. At that moment, Andre's heart raced. He knew what wolves were capable of, and he had heard the stories of attacks, of prey hunted relentlessly. The wolves seemed to be sizing him up, not with the casual indifference one might expect from an animal, but with an intensity that suggested they saw him as something more than just a passerby. In their eyes, Andre was not a friend. He was a possible victim. But instead of running, Andre did something completely unexpected. He took a deep breath, steadying himself. His mind raced, but a part of him felt calm. He knew that running would only trigger their instincts to chase. Instead, he did something that would change everything. Andre slowly unzipped his backpack, the wolf's eyes never leaving him. He pulled out a piece of fresh meat he had brought for his own lunch, something he had planned to eat while resting in the forest. It wasn't much, but it was enough to offer. He placed the meat carefully on the ground in front of him, taking a step back to show that he meant no harm. The wolves paused. For a long moment, nothing happened. The tension in the air seemed to freeze. But then, as if on cue, the largest of the 3 wolves sniffed the air and took a tentative step forward. The other 2 followed suit, and without hesitation, they devoured the meat Andre had offered. There was no aggression, no hostility, just hunger being sated. Andre watched in awe as the wolves ate, their sharp teeth tearing into the flesh with a speed and precision that was almost beautiful in its rawness. He stood motionless, his presence unnoticed as they consumed the food, completely focused on the meal. For the first time in his life, he felt a strange connection to these wild creatures. He wasn't just a stranger in their territory, he had become a part of their world, if only for a moment. Once the wolves finished their meal, they seemed to lose interest in Andre, their focus shifting elsewhere. They looked at him for a brief second, as if to acknowledge his kindness, before wandering off into the woods. Andre stood there, stunned by what had just transpired. His heart was still pounding, but it wasn't from fear. It was from something else, something he couldn't quite name yet. The encounter left Andre with a profound sense of wonder. He realized that, in that fleeting moment, he had forged a bond with these creatures that transcended the usual predator-prey relationship. They weren't just animals to be feared. They were beings capable of understanding and, in their own way, appreciating the kindness of others. The next day, Andre returned to the same spot, unsure of what to expect. He wasn't sure if the wolves would remember him or if they would even return. But when he arrived, he saw them again, waiting for him, as if they had been expecting him all along. This time, Andre didn't hesitate. He pulled out another piece of meat from his bag and placed it on the ground. The wolves approached without hesitation, sniffing the air before lowering their heads to feed. There was no aggression, no snarling, just a quiet understanding between them. Andre could feel the trust building between him and these wild animals, a trust that grew stronger with each passing day. Over the following weeks, Andre made it a ritual to visit the wolves. Every day, he would bring food and, in return, the wolves would greet him as if he were one of their own. They never attacked, never showed signs of hostility. Instead, they became familiar with his presence, recognizing him as a source of food and, perhaps, a friend. As the days turned into weeks, Andre began to notice something extraordinary. The wolves, who were once wary of humans, seemed to be softening. They no longer kept their distance. They would approach him more closely, allowing him to observe them up close. Their eyes, once filled with wild suspicion, now reflected something different, a sense of curiosity, even trust. One day, Andre returned with his wife, Angela. She had always been fond of animals, and he couldn't help but think that she might find the wolves as fascinating as he did. When they arrived at the familiar spot, the wolves were there, waiting for them. Andre felt a surge of pride as the animals approached them without fear. Angela was hesitant at first, but Andre encouraged her to sit down, to be still, to observe. Slowly, she began to relax, and when one of the wolves walked up to her, sniffing her hand gently, she laughed in surprise. She wasn't afraid. In fact, she was charmed by these creatures, just as Andre had been. From that day forward, the wolves became a part of their lives. They would visit regularly, forming an unusual but undeniable bond with the wild animals. The wolves weren't just beasts of the forest anymore. They had become part of their family. But what Andre didn't know was that this bond would grow deeper, and soon, it would be tested in ways he could never have anticipated. As the days passed, the bond between Andre and the wolves deepened. What had started as a simple gesture of kindness, offering food to hungry creatures in the forest, had blossomed into a remarkable relationship. It was no longer just about feeding the wolves. It had become a ritual, a way of life. Angela, who had once been unsure about the wolves, had now grown fond of them, and they seemed to have accepted her as one of their own. Every day, the couple would return to the same spot in the woods, just beyond the edge of the Whispering Pines forest, a dense thicket of ancient trees that stretched as far as the eye could see. This location had become their special place, a quiet refuge where they could be with the wolves and enjoy the serenity of the forest. The wolves, now familiar with Andre and Angela, would greet them eagerly. Andre had noticed how the wolves' eyes had softened over time, no longer showing the wild suspicion they once held. Instead, they welcomed him with calmness and trust. They weren't just animals anymore. They had become part of their lives, part of their family. One morning, as the sun peeked over the horizon, casting its golden light through the trees, Angela shared some exciting news with Andre. She was pregnant. After years of longing and waiting, they were finally going to have a child. The joy and excitement in Angela's voice were undeniable. Andre, equally thrilled, couldn't wait to share the good news with their animal friends. He knew the wolves would understand, in their own way. That afternoon, as the sun began its slow descent into the evening sky, Andre and Angela made their way to the forest once again. This time, Andre had something special to share. The wolves were waiting for them, just as they always did. They had become accustomed to their daily visits, their presence now almost a routine for the wolves. Andre stood still for a moment, watching as the wolves gathered around. Sensing his arrival, with a smile on his face, he turned to Angela. "Let's tell them," he said softly, motioning toward the wolves. Angela nodded, her eyes filled with emotion. She gently placed a hand on her belly, and the couple shared the wonderful news with the wolves. It might have seemed odd to some, telling animals about the impending arrival of their child, but for Andre and Angela, it felt completely natural. They had always felt a deep connection with the wolves, and somehow, it felt right to include them in such an important moment in their lives. The wolves, as if understanding the significance of the moment, gathered closer. The largest wolf, whom Andre had come to recognize as the leader, approached and gently nuzzled Angela's hand, as though offering its congratulations. Andre couldn't help but laugh, a sense of joy overwhelming him. The wolves weren't just feeding off their kindness, they were returning it, in their own way. In the months that followed, Angela's pregnancy progressed, and their visits to the forest continued. The wolves became even more protective of Angela, always staying near her, their watchful eyes ensuring her safety. Andre noticed how the wolves, particularly the leader, would often stand between Angela and any potential threats, as though they instinctively understood the importance of her well-being. Then, one fateful day, Andre and Angela were blessed with the arrival of their daughter, Sonia. The moment she was born, their lives changed forever. Andre and Angela were overjoyed, their hearts filled with love for their precious baby girl. They named her Sonia, a name that meant wisdom. for they felt that this child was a gift, one that would bring knowledge and light into their lives. As Sonia grew, she quickly became a part of the unique family that Andre and Angela had created with the wolves. From the moment she could crawl, Sonia was drawn to the wolves. She would giggle as she reached out to touch their fur, and they, in turn, would nuzzle her gently, as if acknowledging the special bond they shared. The wolves were careful around her, never harming her, always patient and kind. In their presence, Sonia seemed to feel an inexplicable calmness, a deep sense of peace that only the wolves could provide. As the years passed, Sonia and the wolves grew closer. By the time she was 2 years old, she had developed a bond with the wolves that was unlike anything Andre or Angela could have imagined. The wolves would follow her around the yard, playing gently with her as she laughed and ran through the grass. They had become her protectors, her playmates, and her companions in the wild, untouched beauty of the Whispering Pines forest. One sunny afternoon, Andre and Angela decided to take Sonia on a walk through the forest. With the wolves by their side, Sonia held onto the hand of her father as they walked along the familiar path, the wolves trotting beside them, their tails wagging gently. Angela smiled as she watched the scene unfold before her. It was a picture of harmony, human and animal, living together in a world that seemed so full of possibilities. But things weren't always as peaceful as they seemed. Sonia, despite being surrounded by the wolves' protection, was still vulnerable to the dangers of the world. The family had been living a life that seemed almost too perfect, a life that most would envy. Yet, deep down, Andre and Angela both knew that their daughter's safety could never be taken for granted. The wolves were fierce protectors, but even they couldn't shield Sonia from everything. As time passed, Sonia became more adventurous, always eager to explore the woods with her animal friends. But with each adventure, the stakes grew higher. Andre and Angela knew that they could only protect their daughter for so long before the forces of nature would test their strength, and their bond with the wolves would be put to the ultimate test. The day would come when this bond would be challenged in ways none of them could have anticipated. The days had passed in a serene rhythm for Andre, Angela, and their daughter, Sonia. Their life, woven with moments of joy and peace, was enriched by the companionship of the three wolves. The forest, Whispering Pines Forest, had become a sanctuary for them, a place where they were always welcome. However, as with all stories, peace is often temporary, and the winds of fate can change in an instant. One crisp autumn day, Sonia began to feel unwell. At first, Angela thought it was just a mild fever, perhaps a seasonal cold. But as the day went on, Sonia's condition worsened. She grew weak, unable to keep any food down, and began to vomit violently. The once energetic and playful little girl seemed to lose her spirit, her usual laughter replaced with weak cries. Andre and Angela were frantic. They tried everything they could think of, her favorite foods, cold compresses, even remedies they had learned from the elders in the nearby village. But nothing worked. Sonia's condition only grew more alarming. Desperate, Andre rushed her to the local hospital, hoping for answers. At the hospital, doctors examined Sonia thoroughly, running a series of tests. The diagnosis was grim. Sonia had a rare illness, one that even the doctors seemed to struggle to understand. She was losing strength by the hour, and despite their best efforts, her condition continued to deteriorate. The doctor's words were blunt and heartbreaking. "We've done all we can. I'm afraid there's nothing more we can do for her." Andre and Angela were crushed. The world they had built around them, a world where Sonia and the wolves shared a bond of love and trust, was crumbling. They couldn't imagine a future without their precious daughter. But the reality of her condition left them with no choice but to prepare for the inevitable. That night, they made the painful decision to say goodbye. Sonia passed away in her sleep, surrounded by her parents' love and the quiet hum of the hospital room. Andre and Angela held each other in grief, their hearts shattered by the loss of their child. It felt as though everything that had once brought them joy had been stolen away in an instant. They arranged for a small funeral in the Hawthorne Village Cemetery, inviting friends, family, and those who had supported them through the years. The entire village came together to mourn the loss of Sonia, a girl who had brought light and happiness to their lives, even if only for a brief time. The wolves, too, seemed to understand, though they could not accompany Andre and Angela to the funeral. They stayed close by, waiting in the woods, their mournful howls echoing in the distance. The night after the funeral, Andre and Angela returned home, broken and defeated. They had lost their daughter, their light, and now they were left with only memories. They couldn't bear to think of the future without her, and as they sat together in silence, they wept for the child they would never see grow up. It had been 5 hours since the funeral, and just as Andre and Angela sat in their home, trying to come to terms with the loss, something unimaginable happened. The phone rang, its shrill tone cutting through the silence of their home. Andre picked up, his voice shaky. "Hello? Mr. Andre," the voice on the other end said. "You need to come to the cemetery. There's something strange happening." Confused and alarmed, Andre hung up the phone and looked at Angela. They both stood up at the same time, a sense of urgency overcoming them. Without a word, they rushed to the cemetery where Sonia had been laid to rest. They didn't know what to expect, but their hearts were racing with a strange mixture of dread and curiosity. When they arrived at the cemetery, they found a crowd gathered near Sonia's grave. People were whispering in confusion. Some were in shock, and others stood at a distance, unsure of what to do. But what they all saw was impossible to comprehend. Andre and Angela could hardly believe their eyes. There, in front of Sonia's grave, were the three wolves. They were not attacking or acting aggressively. Instead, they were digging, their powerful paws tearing at the earth. But it wasn't just that. There was something almost protective in their actions. One wolf stood guard, watching over the others as they worked, its eyes fixed on anyone who dared approach. The scene was surreal, and Andre couldn't believe what he was seeing. "Why are they doing this?" Andre whispered to Angela, his voice trembling. The answer came when the wolves finally finished their task. They had unearthed the coffin, and as the lid of the casket was lifted by the force of the wolves digging, a shocking sight awaited them. There, inside the coffin, lay Sonia, but to everyone's astonishment, she was still alive. Her body, once cold and still, was now warm, her chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. Her eyes fluttered open, and she let out a soft whimper, as if she had just awoken from a long, deep sleep. The crowd gasped in disbelief. Andre and Angela rushed forward, their hearts pounding, as they gently pulled Sonia from the casket. The wolves, their task now complete, stood back, watching the reunion with a quiet reverence. Sonia was alive. How this miracle had happened, no one could explain. But the wolves, in their uncanny understanding, had known something that no one else did. They had heard Sonia's cries for help, her faintest whispers of life buried under the earth. They had dug her out, saving her when no one else could. As Andre and Angela rushed Sonia to the hospital, doctors were amazed. The child who had been declared dead was now alive, her body showing no signs of harm, only the faintest traces of a struggle to survive. She was weak but recovering, and with every passing moment, Sonia grew stronger, her eyes shining with the same light they once had. The bond between Andre, Angela, and the wolves had been tested, and in the most extraordinary way, it had proven to be unbreakable. Sonia was back, in the forest. Whispering Pines held yet another secret, one that would remain a part of their family forever. As the years passed, the family's love for the wolves never wavered. They had saved Sonia, and in return, Andre and Angela continued to honor the bond between them. It was a bond that no one, not even fate itself, could break.